After studying Counterpoint for years, I want to show you what actually works for me. And I'm not talking about the textbook stuff, but the real practical things that you can use right away. And the best part, it all comes down to just 2 simple guidelines. So let's start. Here's a little melody I borrowed from my business partner. And yes, he's cool with that, don't worry. So it's all based on the Mixolydian scale. And I've color-coded it to make things easier. Red stands for all the small steps, and blue shows the bigger leaps. Why? Because seeing where the big leaps are and how they are surrounded, this really helps us understand the shape of the line. Okay, so let's tackle the second line. And now those 2 guidelines come in really handy. And I say guidelines on purpose. They are not rules. And why? Because at the end of the day, it's your musical world. Do whatever feels right to you. To me, following those 2 guidelines immediately led to solid results. Something most listeners will find pleasing from the start. That's why I want you to know this. So let's tackle that. Avoid doubling in unison or octaves. I try to keep each voice doing its own thing. But hey, sometimes a doubled note just happens. And maybe you really love both lines and you don't want to change a single thing in there. And if that's the case, no problem. Just make sure that after the doubled note, the lines move in opposite directions. So they either move away from each other or toward each other. And that keeps things feeling alive and independent. And second, don't write a 13 between 2 lines. That's a vertical distance of 13 half steps or chromatic steps. And this really tends to stick out, and not in a good way, especially when you're dealing with just 2 voices. Now, that's usually the moment where the jazz guys jump up and say, well, Frank, wait a second. What about the flat 9th chord? That also contains a 13, and it sounds great. Yes, you're right, it sounds great. But here's the catch. A flat 9th chord works because it has a full harmonic context. You've got the root, the flat 9, and usually you have the minor 7th in there too. So that's not line writing anymore. That is harmony, right? So let's stick to only line writing for the moment. The 13 interval just sounds dissonant, like it's floating without any support. So when you're writing pure counterpoint, I just avoid the 13. And that keeps it clean, and the lines will sound much more intentional. And the 13 appears in different places depending on the scale you pick. So let's look at an example. Let's just pick the Mixolydian, for example. Here it appears when I play the F over the E. That would be a 13. And it also appears when I play the B flat over the A down there. If the A was 1 octave lower, then this would create a 13. And we call this the producer's interval because usually producers don't have any clue about music theory, and they don't care for a good reason because they take care of production stuff. The only interval that he can figure out is the 13 because it sounds so dissonant that he can always identify this moment where the composer hit a 13. And usually that's the moment where the producer says, it doesn't sound good. And I've really lived through this enough times to understand that I simply avoid a 13 in line writing. I'm not talking about chords or flat 9th chords. They actually work very well. So I like simple stuff, and I want to simplify the concept of counterpoint a little bit here, because honestly, I just think of it as a conversation. And what happens in a conversation? Well, one guy talks and the other one listens, and then they switch. It's an exchange of energy almost. And that is exactly how I see it with melodies. So when one line is moving, the other should stay a bit more still, and then they switch roles. And I'm not concerned with whether it's 2 notes against 1 or 4 notes against 1 or whatever species of counterpoint you want to call it. Honestly, I don't care. What matters to me is the balance between motion and the rest points. And that's the main idea I follow when writing a second line. It should feel independent, like it could stand on its own, but it should also work perfectly fine with the first line, horizontally and vertically. So let's see how we can apply all these concepts to a real-life example. The same line in the treble, and now we see a second line show up down there in the bass clef. So that pretty much shows some fantastic examples of counterpoint writing. And also it brings in other elements for variety. This one here is something that can be part of counterpoint if the voices move in opposite directions and things like that. However, if you move in the same rhythm with your upper line, your ear tends to go to the upper line. That is what you will be hearing. That is why big band stuff is so hard to figure out when it comes to the inner voices. You only hear the top line when you harmonize your top line with chord tones usually, and then you figure out the lead line very quickly. You figure out the bass line also very quickly and easily, because those are the outer parts of everything. They are the easiest ones to recognize. The inner parts, that is really hard, because your ear always goes to the outer parts. That is why I would actually consider this as part of harmonization. This is actually a very nice moment of contrast in between these conventional moments of rhythmic counterpoint. And that is how I would use it. If I would aim only towards rhythmic counterpoint all the way through, it might be very demanding for the audience to follow. And that is not what I want to do. I don't want to give the audience an assignment. These are all tools that you can use, that you should use, and whatever serves the job or the picture is fantastic. And here's the cool part. Once you've built a strong line, you can reuse parts of it in other places. Turn them into textures or motors that drive the piece forward. It just makes life easier as a composer. Why reinvent the wheel every single bar? Well, I used to do that, by the way, write every measure from scratch. And sure, it felt creative, kind of, but it also burned me out. And I was working so hard, and it still felt like I was getting nowhere. So eventually I realized the problem wasn't me necessarily. Well, it had to do with me, but it was a lack of technique. And that's the beauty of counterpoint. You're not just writing melodies, but you're creating a musical conversation that you can build upon. And a conversation always drives the story forward, provided it's a good conversation. And that all is a wonderful topic for another video. So please let me know in the comments if you found this helpful, and if you need support implementing this stuff into your own compositions, I'm here to help. So this was Frank, and I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. See you in the next video. Bye.